In this video, I'll show you how I made this sweet kitchenette for the cottage. I don't have a lot of space to work with here, just this wall and the hutch. I will definitely need some wall shelves. I started off by making some brackets for the first shelf. I wanted it to match the brackets I made for the front wall shelf to tie everything together. I cut out the bracket and then traced the second one onto the cereal box. I did that to help give me two of the same size of brackets. I made sure to cut the traced one just below the trace line to keep them the same size. I had a viewer recently ask me how I do my layers neatly for less sanding. I glued my two cut out brackets to some food packaging or cardstock. You can go over the piece or pieces with a brayer. If I'm in a hurry, I just press it really well with my fingers, especially the edges. Then I cut up next to the edge of the piece. For me, this works better than tracing all the pieces than gluing together. That's when I notice that the edges don't usually line up very neatly. And if I need more than two layers, I repeat that process of gluing that piece back down to some cereal box, and then I cut it up next to the edge. This is the decorative piece from the kick plate of the hutch. I used it to help tie in this shelf with the hutch. And again, I glue the piece down and cut up next to the edge until I have as many layers as I need. For food packaging, I noticed 3 layers usually gives me a 1/16 of an inch thickness. But it really just depends on the food packaging. For this piece, I used some foam board, but you could use food packaging too, because it's not going to show. Here's how my brackets turned out for this shelf. Sanding all the pieces is optional, of course, but I feel it gives a more finished look to the piece in the end. I start assembling the shelf by gluing the brackets onto the foam board on the ends. Then I glue the decorative piece onto the front of the shelf. Here's how it's looking so far. I wanted the wood on this shelf to look thicker, so I cut a piece of foam board to be the shelf board. I needed to cover the raw edges of this foam board, so I used this piece of scrap cardstock to cover the edges. I finished it off by gluing the shelf board to the bracket piece. For this next shelf, I drew a freehand design onto some paper to create a pattern. I want the top shelf to be narrower than the bottom shelf. I cut it out and traced a second, just like I did for the brackets of the previous shelf. Then I glued them both down to some cereal box. I decided to run the brayer over these pieces instead of using my fingers. I needed more than 2 layers, so I glued them down to some more cereal box and cut them out up close to the edge again like the previous shelf. For the sides of this shelf, I believe I did 4 layers. You can see here that the shelves are not all the same width. They're 1/8 of an inch off from each other. Here I'm drawing the shelf placement lines. Doing it this way helps me keep the shelf straight. I glued all of the shelves onto one of the ends first. Once it was dry, I glued on the other side piece. And here is how that piece looks finished. Starting the table construction, I'm cutting out several long, skinny, triangular pieces to paper quill with. I don't want all the quilling to look the same thickness, so I cut some of them in half. You might want to use scissors, and I quill with the smaller end of the two. I'm quilling onto some Q-tips that I cut off the fuzzy ends. I didn't start quilling at the very end. I came in some and started, and you'll see why in a minute. What I'm trying to create here is a spindle leg. What really helps is to look at some pictures of real spindle legs while you're quilling to be inspired. Then try to recreate the second leg as closely as you can to the first one. Now I'm making the top part of the spindle leg. I'm not too sure what it's called. I cut a little rectangle of double layered foam board like this. I used some scrap cardstock strips to cover the whole outside except for the top part. I drilled a hole in the center on the end with the cardstock. I didn't drill very deep though. I push and glue the paper quilled spindle leg into the hole, and you want it to be tight. Looking at pictures of spindle legs, I noticed they have the corners sanded off down by the spindle. I also sanded the sharp edges to soften them a little bit on the sides. I can't even begin to tell you how happy I am with how these legs turned out. I cut a piece from cereal box that will glue between the legs, and I used the hutch kick plate again to create the shape on there. That way it helps tie this piece in with the others. I'm using a piece of foam board to help me glue this piece to the legs. That way it sets it back a little bit. I kept seeing cute little side tables like this, and I thought it would be adorable in the cottage kitchen. I had to use a skinnier piece of foam board to glue this side. I just love the way the front of the table is looking so far. I wasn't too sure how deep I wanted the table to be. It's sitting next to the hutch. I don't want it to block the hutch either. I cut this strip of cereal box the depth I wanted the side table to be. That way I just had to cut a piece off of it the width I need the table. Then I glue the tabletop down to the strip that I cut, and then I only have to cut away on one side. And just the way I explained before, I glue and cut next to the edge and then repeat for as many layers as I need. I did 3 layers for the tabletop, and I did a 4th layer, but I cut it just a little smaller on the 2 short sides and one of the long sides to create kind of a bevel look. I forgot to record when I cut this back piece out, and I also embossed it to look like paneling. This piece is the tabletop. You can see the little beveled edge that I created. This piece is the bottom shelf. It had to have some notches cut out on the corners to allow room for the spindle legs. These little rectangles are the sides. You can see I base coated everything with the Mod Podge, and then I painted the same brown wood tone I used for the other pieces in the cottage. Painting it first helped me create the wood tone easier. I glued the sides onto the front, and I made sure to set them back a little when I glued them so that they would match the front. And then I glued the back on. You can see I didn't glue the back to the edge of the sides. That's because the sides are set in some. The carved wood you see on the front piece, I did with watered down air dry clay, and I painted on several layers. I glued the bottom shelf in place, and then I glued on the tabletop. Now let's see how it looks in the cottage. I am so happy with this little table. I think I might try to make a dining table with spindle legs. It's probably one of my favorite pieces I've ever made. I'm holding the shelves in place to give me an idea how it's all going to look. And now it's finally time to have fun gluing everything in. I made these pink plates from a previous video, which I'll link at the end of this one. I was hoping for you to see me gluing everything in, but my arm keeps getting in the way. I made some clay that's new to me, and I used some of my older molds to make jars and bottles. And here I'm gluing some of the labels on, which these labels are from my general store. I used a lot of leftover pieces from other projects too. I positioned everything the way I liked it, and now I'm just gluing everything in. And I'm sorry that my hand keeps causing the camera to blur. I was having so much fun playing, I didn't want it to end. When I first started this cottage, I believe I mentioned that the owner of the cottage loves reading and gardening, and I said I wanted to fill this house with flowers and plants. So I really need to start adding some flowers, and I want these flowers to be over the top. I want to create a large arrangement that will go on top of the hutch, and I'm using floral foam as the base for my arrangement. I have a large swag that I bought years ago at Hobby Lobby because the leaves are perfect dollhouse size. I'm cutting off bits of it and stuffing it into the foam. Not too much though, because I still needed to add other things. I needed to check the height and width of the arrangement once in a while to make sure it wasn't too big. I took some of my rope armatures I made in my plant supply video, and I poked that in there too. I will link that video at the end of this video as well. When I thought I had enough green added to the foam, I then cut some of the plastic plants and glued some flocking onto it. This is the flocking that I created in my plant making supply video. I started with this yellow because it reminds me a lot of yellow status. I also made several with the blue to be like blue status. When I felt like I had made plenty of those, I looked at my arrangement again to see if it needed some more green, And if it did, I put a little bit of glue on it and added this green flocking. And then it was time to start gluing in the little branches that I made with the little flowers on them. I really wish I had some white flocking because that would have been really pretty to soften it and make it look like there was some baby's breath. I am probably mispronouncing this, but my very favorite flower is peonies. Let me know if you'd be interested in a video on how I made mine. I just love the pop of color that they add. This arrangement is really starting to take shape now. At some point, I thought it would look beautiful on the wardrobe, so I got the wardrobe out and glued it on. I think it's perfect for the wardrobe. It's almost as if it was made for it. There was a basket that I had on the wardrobe, so I think I'll use that on top of the hutch. And I filled it with foam, and I covered it with glue, and then I covered the glue with green flocking. I took some of the same plastic plants and poked them all over in the little basket. I wanted it to look full. And here I'm checking the height again so I don't make it too tall. I'm not worrying about the scale. I want this cottage to be kind of a fantasy or a dreamy type cottage, not realistic. I'm adding a little bit of the pink and the yellow flocking just here and there, but I'm trying to keep it light and airy too. I'm having so much fun creating these little flower arrangements. I have done probably more playing than anything else making this video. I had only made so many of these little flowers ahead of time, so I had just a few left, and I was trying to evenly space them the best that I could. I had a really hard time pulling myself away from this project to finish this video. This little kitchenette turned out way better than I had pictured in my mind. I just love the way everything came together with all the little bits and bobs that I had made from previous videos. I hope that you have enjoyed watching this video as much as I enjoyed creating it. Thank you so much for watching, and I will see you next time. Bye-bye.